What should the relationship between a teacher and a student be like? You might think that such a partnership should involve respect, patience, and attentiveness, but certainly not romance. But what if one side of this educational collaboration imagines love where, in principle, it does not and cannot exist? Help this channel grow. Like the video, try the new hype feature, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. Ming Sen Shiue was born on October 15, 1950, in Taiwan to a Chinese family, Mary and Jim Shiue. In reality, their names were different, but for convenience, the couple adapted them to an American style. Ming's parents were highly educated people. His mother taught mathematics at several universities in Taiwan. His father also worked in education and conducted research in forestry. Jim was so successful and respected that he was once invited to work at the University of Minnesota in the United States. The entire family was overjoyed about the upcoming move, as they had long dreamed of going to the United States. In 1957, when Ming was 7 years old, the family moved to Minnesota. Jim was appointed head of the forestry department, and Mary secured a position as a mathematics instructor at the same university. Soon, the Shiue family welcomed two more sons, Charles and Ron. The family was adjusting to their new life in America, and everything seemed to be going wonderfully. But when Ming turned 11, tragedy struck their home. After a short illness, his father passed away. The mother and boys were left without male support. From that moment, problems began. On his deathbed, Jim called his eldest son to his side and told him that, according to Chinese tradition, Ming was now the eldest male in the family and must take on all masculine responsibilities and care for his mother and younger brothers. Unfortunately, the boy took his dying father's words too literally. After the funeral, Ming decided he was the head of the family and, in just a couple of weeks, became a nightmare for his loved ones. Instead of being a caring and supportive man as his father had intended, he turned into a tyrant. His two younger brothers were 6 and 3 years old at the time, while Ming was almost 12. They were all still very young, but Ming decided to treat his brothers like personal slaves. They had to obey all his orders. If Ming was hungry, the two were expected to go and prepare food. If Ming wanted his room cleaned, his brothers had to grab rags and buckets and clean everything. Every day, when Ming returned home from school, his younger brothers were required to greet him, take his backpack and jacket, and hang them up, then carry his textbooks and notebooks to the desk, and afterward remove his shoes and socks. Then Ming would sit on the couch and issue commands. Every day, the younger children were obligated to cook him hot soup with an exact number of crackers. He also got used to drinking a glass of milk in front of the television. If his brothers didn't meet his demands precisely as he ordered, for example, if they didn't pour enough milk into his glass or served the wrong number of crackers, he would beat them with a belt. These were cruel, merciless beatings. Ming literally became a juvenile dictator in his own home, and this went on for years. He dominated his younger brothers, constantly insulting and humiliating them. He practically deprived them of a normal childhood. As the boys grew, so did their hatred for their older brother, because the punishments became harsher over the years. Beating them was no longer enough for Ming. Once, his younger brother Ron, who was 5 at the time, did something that displeased Ming. As punishment, Ming shoved Ron into an electric oven, slammed the door shut, and began turning the heat knob on and off. The younger children often ran to their mother in tears, complaining about Ming's ruthless punishments and cruel treatment. Incredibly, each time, their mother simply said she could do nothing about it, because Ming was the head of the family, and they all had to obey him. At 13, when Ming hit puberty and developed certain desires, things got even worse. The teenager began showing deviations in this regard. He roamed the neighborhood, peeking into windows to see things not meant for his eyes. From that point on, he gained a reputation in the neighborhood as a juvenile pervert. However, that wasn't the worst part, because Ming developed a romantic interest in his own mother. It started with him forcing his younger brothers to sneak into their mother's room at night while she slept and touch her chest. The boys refused, for which they received another slap. For the next 6 months, Ming himself would sneak into Mary's bedroom and climb into her bed to touch her body while she slept. One night, Mary woke up to find her eldest son under her blanket with a flashlight, having cut a hole in her pajamas and examining her private parts. The most shocking thing was that the mother did nothing. She ignored the situation, hoping it would resolve itself and the problem would disappear. However, at 14, Ming became an even more troubled teenager, as he started setting fires to houses in his neighborhood and throwing rocks at passing cars. Fortunately, the police detained him and ordered a psychiatric evaluation. This time, Mary, who was genuinely afraid of her eldest son, told the doctor everything he had been doing at home. According to the mother, Ming often lied, but always insisted he was right. From early childhood, he was uncontrollable and never took responsibility for his behavior. When the doctors heard about the teenager's intimate interest in his mother, they concluded he needed medical help. Ming was placed in a psychiatric ward for juveniles, where he was supposed to receive help. That could have been the end of Ming Sen Shiue's story, but human error intervened. Someone incorrectly filled out his paperwork, and the patient's information was never entered into the system. Although the doctors noted in his medical record that he could pose a serious danger to society and recommended long-term treatment due to someone's mistake, Ming was discharged from the ward after just a few days. In the fall of 1965, when the teenager turned 15, he moved to high school, and a new subject appeared in his schedule: algebra, taught by a woman named Mary Stauffer. Ming didn't just fall for his teacher, he lost his head over the overwhelming feelings and became obsessed with her. Mary Stauffer was born on June 20th, 1943, and grew up in Minnesota in a deeply religious family. Mary was kind, caring, generous, and highly driven. She graduated from high school in 1961 and then enrolled in college, majoring in mathematics. In 1964, Mary married her high school sweetheart, a man named Irvin. In 1965, when Mary was 22, she graduated from college and immediately took a job as a math teacher at Alexander Ramsey High School in Roseville, Minnesota, where Ming transferred to study. From the very first class, the young man became fixated on Mary, and it wasn't a typical teenage crush. Ming's feelings quickly morphed into an intense obsession and passion. What was it about the young woman that so captivated the teenager? It was simple. Mary reminded Ming of his own mother. First, they were both named Mary. Second, both women were math teachers, and they looked strikingly similar, dressing modestly and conservatively, wearing no makeup or jewelry, and appearing like typical housewives of the 1950s and 1960s. Deep down, Ming knew his attraction to his own mother was inappropriate, so he simply transferred his desires to his math teacher, Mary. The intimate fantasies that haunted Ming are often associated with narcissistic personality disorder. Possessing a grandiose sense of self-importance, the boy considered himself special and extraordinary, a divine gift to women. In his dreams, Shiue was always a knight in shining armor, bursting in to rescue the object of his affection and carrying her away in his arms. However, his dreams and desires didn't stay confined to his mind. They spilled onto paper. Coming home from school, Ming would sit at his desk and write erotic novels about Miss Stauffer. These fantasies completely consumed the teenager's thoughts, infiltrating every aspect of his life. Shiue genuinely saw himself as strong and masculine, believing that all the girls at school wanted him, but his heart belonged to only one love: Mary. Ming studied algebra for the next 2 years, and during that time, he was utterly infatuated with his teacher. Not only was the teenager in love, but he also firmly believed that Mary secretly harbored an equal passion for him. In reality, the young woman paid no special attention to Ming. She interacted with all her students equally, showing no favoritism. In Shiyui's mind, this was nothing more than pretense. He was convinced that Mary was too shy to show her feelings for the teenager in public. He believed Stauffer thought of him constantly, and that one day, defying public opinion, she would confess her love for him, and hand in hand, they would run off into the sunset to live happily ever after. These were the images he painted in his romantic stories. Over the 2 years Ming studied algebra under Miss Stauffer, his obsessive ideas grew stronger and stronger. In 1968, Shiue turned 18 and was in his senior year when the worst thing he could never have anticipated happened. Mary Stauffer resigned from her teaching position at the school. As mentioned earlier, Mary grew up in a religious family. She and her husband, Irvin, adhered to church traditions and devoted much time to missionary work. This time, the couple decided to go to the Philippines for an indefinite period. Ming Sen Shiue was utterly devastated and crushed by this news. The young man felt betrayed. The love of his life had vanished in an unknown direction. Not knowing how to cope with his emotions, he threw himself into his studies. In reality, Ming was a very intelligent young man with a high level of intellect. He earned straight A's and won nearly every academic competition. Besides his studies, Shiue played football and basketball. It seemed that Ming excelled at everything. When he graduated high school, he was named the most promising student. After high school, Ming enrolled at the University of Minnesota, where both his parents had once worked. But after a year of study, his mental health deteriorated sharply. Unable to handle the stress, the young man dropped out and returned home to his mother and 2 brothers. It was then that Shiue started his own electronics repair business, which proved highly successful. The business grew quickly, and the number of employees increased. Later, Ming Sen Shiue's company was valued at $250,000. Despite his success, Ming was very lonely. He rarely interacted with other employees. When he returned home, he barely spoke to his mother or brothers. He would retreat to the basement where he lived and only emerge the next day to go to work. The young man completely isolated himself, stopped caring for personal hygiene, and rarely showered. During this time, his mother remarried and moved from Minnesota to Virginia. Ming, Ron, and Charles remained in the house. The brothers' relationship was strained. The younger ones still hated their older brother for how he treated them during childhood. Spending much of his time alone, Ming returned to his intimate fantasies with renewed vigor. All the hours he spent alone in the basement, he fantasized about intimacy with his math teacher, Mary. Although Ming was now in his 20s, his dreams about Mrs. Stauffer never faded. His perverse fantasies sometimes included actresses he saw on television. All the heroines looked the same. They played the role of family matriarchs, wore modest, conservative dresses, used little to no makeup, and adorned themselves with no jewelry. This is exactly how Ming's mother and his teacher, Mrs. Stauffer, looked. Shirley Jones from The Partridge Family, Florence Henderson, who played Mrs. Brady in The Brady Bunch, and Julie Andrews from The Sound of Music. All of them had short haircuts, dressed in the same style, and were modest family women. All these actresses, and of course algebra teacher Mary Stauffer, became the heroines of Ming's erotic masterpieces. Shiue spent hours pouring his soul into creating literary works about his intimate fantasies. He adhered to the format of a Victorian novel. His ideal woman was a mother, kind, homely, caring, and reserved. Each story resembled the others. They always featured a young, handsome man, Shiue himself. This man was a true womanizer, strong, proud, and rugged. Naturally, he was godlike in bed. Ming's novels were very old-fashioned. The protagonist rode a horse, burst into a castle or estate, and abducted the woman. At first, the lady tried to resist, but in the end, she could no longer deny her love and passion for the man who kidnapped her. Often these heroines were married, but their husbands couldn't satisfy their wives' intimate desires. All the novels ended the same way. Unable to resist the perfect body of the hero, whom the author identified with himself, the women fell into his arms and wanted to have his children. The central theme of the stories was explicit romance and the desire to start a family. It all seemed very dramatic, sometimes even comical. But this is what Ming wrote his novels about. Moreover, some of these stories were later published online. Writing erotic novels alone in the quiet of the basement was one thing, but when Ming's fantasies came to life in the most horrific way, that was another matter entirely. In the mid-1970s, Shiue was about 25 years old. At that time, his behavior became increasingly alarming, and a significant role in this was played by a movie called The Teacher. This Italian erotic comedy, a coming-of-age film, depicted a lustful teenager who decided not to waste time fruitlessly pursuing girls his age, but to seek a lover among older women. At that moment, his parents hired a 28-year-old tutor who wanted to earn money for her upcoming wedding, but ended up leaving her fiancé. The film included explicit scenes and nudity. Watching the plot unfold, Ming sat there recognizing himself. He was convinced that this movie was his life, that Mrs. Stauffer, his algebra teacher, planned to leave her husband and start a relationship with her former student, Ming Sen Shiue. The film became a sort of signal for the young man that he and Mary were meant to be together. He rewatched scenes from The Teacher over and over, imagining himself and Mrs. Stauffer. His erotic fantasies about his own mother never went away either. When his mother came to visit, she stayed in her old bedroom. One night, 25-year-old Ming sneaked into her room and lay in bed next to her. The woman asked her grown son to leave the bedroom, as it was inappropriate and unnatural. He left but was furious, feeling rejected. After this incident, he almost stopped paying attention to his own mother. Nevertheless, the bedroom rejection convinced Ming that Mary was the only woman destined for him. He was certain she had been thinking of him all this time, even though it had been 8 years since their last meeting. Shiue was so obsessed with this idea that he believed the teacher's story from the movie was real. He decided he needed to track down Mrs. Stauffer. The young man started combing through directories and address books until he stumbled upon the name Irvin Stauffer. This man lived in Minnesota, not far from Ming. Convinced he had found his Mary, Shiue went to the address one late evening. He waited outside for a while, scoping out the area. Then, gathering his courage and armed with a gun, he broke into the house. As soon as Ming entered, he saw an elderly couple, clearly not Mary and her husband. Shiue ordered the homeowners to lie on the floor, tide ascending, then began ransacking the house. He found a photo of Mary and her husband in the house, which further convinced him the teacher must be nearby. He returned to the elderly couple, showed them the photo, and asked where the woman was, to which the homeowner replied that it was their daughter-in-law and son, who were currently living in another country. Ming was terribly upset. Before leaving the house, he warned the couple that if they called the police, he would track them down and kill them. But the elderly couple still contacted law enforcement. Since they didn't know who Ming was and had never seen him before, the authorities couldn't track him down, and the incident was classified as a burglary. Meanwhile, Shiue returned to his life of complete isolation. His 2 brothers, Charles and Ron, eventually moved out, leaving Ming alone in the house. He decided to wait, as sooner or later Mary would have to return to the States, and then he would save her from her hated husband. Years passed, and all this time Ming lived in anticipation of his beloved. Then, one day, it happened. In 1979, a local newspaper published a small article about the Stauffers, detailing their missionary work in the Philippines and their return to the U.S. Ming was thrilled and couldn't believe his luck. He was overjoyed and took it as a sign that he and Mary were destined to be together. He quickly found out that the Stauffers had settled in an apartment on the campus of Bethel University, just 8 kilometers from Shiue's house. It turned out that Mary and her husband now had 2 children, a girl named Elizabeth, who was 7 at the time, and a younger boy named Steve. Ming began stalking Mary everywhere. She often gave talks about her missionary work at the university, and Shiue was salalu in the audience. When Mary left the house for errands, Ming followed her. Every Sunday, the family went to church, and their stalker was always lurking nearby. Shiue memorized the schedules of all the Stauffer family members, their hobbies, interests, food preferences, and even the children's favorite toys. All his free time, Ming thought about Mary, watched her family, and spent every evening near her apartment. Then he would return home and watch his favorite erotic film, The Teacher. All this time, he identified himself and Mary with the film's characters and was firmly convinced that Mrs. Stauffer secretly wanted and waited for him. When he would come, grab her with his strong hand and take her away. Ming stalked Mary for about a year but never approached her, always staying in the shadows. During this time, his younger brother Ron returned to the family home. They still barely communicated, so Ming didn't need to explain where he spent his days. Then something significant happened. In the spring of 1980, during a church service, the Stauffers stood up and announced they were returning to the Philippines for another missionary project. This time, they planned to leave for 4 years. When Ming learned of this, he had a full-blown panic attack. He realized he could lose Mary again. He was tempted to grab his beloved right there in the church and run off with her far away. But Shiue pulled himself together, understanding he needed to act smarter. Ming planned to ensure Mary never left the country again. He decided to kidnap Mrs. Stauffer because she was destined for him, and they were meant to be together. Shiue began meticulous preparations. He cleared out a storage room in the basement where he intended to keep Mary. He attached chains to the wall, bought new blankets and pillows. He stocked the refrigerator with his teacher's favorite food. The man set up his own little dungeon Dao Yiga keep Mary there until she admitted she loved him. The most insane thing was that his younger brother Ron lived upstairs, but that didn't stop Ming. In fact, there were several failed kidnapping attempts. On May 5, 1980, Shiue broke a window in Mary's apartment building trying to get inside. But the noise woke the neighbors, so the intruder got scared and fled. 9 days later, on May 14th, Ming almost managed to enter the apartment, but neighbors noticed him tampering with the building's security system. He got scared again and managed to escape. The third time, on May 15th, Ming climbed into the building's basement and drilled a hole in the ceiling. By a chilling coincidence, the hole was directly under the couple's bed. As Mary and Irvin lay in bed talking, Shiue sat below, listening to every word. Ming realized he couldn't kidnap Mrs. Stauffer in front of her husband, as he likely couldn't overpower Irvin. But he overheard the woman's plans for the next day, which seemed like the perfect opportunity to carry out his plan. Mary mentioned to her husband that she had an appointment at the hairdresser the next day. May 16, 1980, was supposed to be a momentous day for 29-year-old Ming. He would meet the love of his life, Mary Stauffer, who was 36 at the time, face to face for the first time. With only 4 days left before Mary's departure to the Philippines, the woman, heading to a beauty salon with her 8-year-old daughter, could never have imagined that an ordinary trip would turn into the worst nightmare imaginable. That day, around 4:30 p.m., Mary and her daughter left the salon and headed to their car when they saw a stranger in a leather jacket and sunglasses. This was the first thing that caught the teacher's eye. Mrs. Stauffer always tried to see the good in people, so despite the man's suspicious appearance, she assumed he just wanted to ask for directions and had completely innocent intentions. But instead, Ming pulled out a gun and held it to Beth's head, ordering Mary to get behind the wheel. Then he sat the girl in the back seat and took the passenger seat himself. Beth was still held at gunpoint, so Mary drove and tried to find out what the stranger wanted from them. The woman offered money, help, anything, as long as he didn't harm her daughter. At that moment, Shiue suddenly realized that Mrs. Stauffer didn't even recognize him. Ming's world collapsed instantly because, in his imagination, Mary was supposed to throw herself into his arms and say how long she had waited for him. For 15 years, he had fantasized about the moment of meeting the object of his obsession, convincing himself that Mary had also dreamed of seeing him and secretly loved him. Ming was furious. How could she not remember him? But besides the fact that Mrs. Stauffer had no idea who he was, there was another problem. Her daughter Beth who wasn't supposed to be there at all. Shiue wanted Mary to belong only to him, and Beth symbolized Mary's marriage to Irvin. Ming wanted to start a new life with his beloved, have children, and forget about the past. At the same time, he understood he couldn't harm the girl because Mary would never forgive him. In the end, he forced the car to stop in a secluded area, tied up the captives, shoved them into the trunk, got behind the wheel, and drove around the area for a bit. The next stage of the plan was to transfer the mother and daughter to his van, which Shiue had parked in advance in one of the city's districts. And in the most horrific way, another innocent child got dragged into this. When Ming approached the trunk to move Mary and Beth to his vehicle, he saw children among the trees. The car was parked near a park where two young boys, Timmy and Jason, were playing. Jason Wilkman was only 6 years old and was described as an incredibly sweet, happy child. He was very curious and spent a lot of time outdoors playing with other kids. When Ming opened the trunk of Mary's car to pull them out, the mother and daughter started screaming and resisting, drawing attention to themselves. Hearing the women's cries, 6-year-old Jason came closer and watched curiously. The boy thought someone might need his help. Then Ming turned around and noticed Jason standing close by, staring right at him. The man panicked because a witness was not part of his plan. He had deliberately parked the car in a secluded spot, thinking no one would be around. Without hesitation, Shiue grabbed Jason and shoved him into the trunk with Mary and Beth. Without finishing what he started, he sped off from the parking lot. Meanwhile, the other boy, Timmy, saw everything from a distance and didn't approach. After Ming drove off, the child ran to his mother and told her that some man took Jason away in a green car. The police got involved. An immediate search began for the car that took the abducted boy. Based on Timmy's description, a composite sketch of the suspected kidnapper was created. All this time, Ming was driving around the city in Mrs. Stauffer's car. His entire plan was falling apart before his eyes. First Beth, who wasn't supposed to be with Mary, and now this boy watching his actions. The kidnapper was still in Mary's car and realized he could be stopped. As soon as someone connected the car to Stauffer and her daughter, they would start looking for her vehicle. He needed to get rid of the car as soon as possible. Ming was nervous and didn't know what to do until a sinister plan formed in his head. Shiue decided he had to get rid of the boy, or all his efforts would be in vain. The exact details are unknown, but it's believed that Ming drove to the isolated Carlos Avery Wildlife Management area, found a tire iron or some metal rod in the car, pulled Jason out of the trunk and struck him twice on the head, resulting in instant death. Shiue hid the body in a small pit, covering it with dirt and leaves. After that, Ming drove around the area for a few more hours. Unfortunately, Mrs. Stauffer's green car, by some strange coincidence, didn't catch the police's attention. Later, when Mary and Beth asked what the man did with the boy, he lied, saying he left the child in another area where he would easily be found. Shiue didn't want his beloved to think poorly of him, so he naturally kept silent about Jason's tragic fate. When it got dark outside, Ming finally returned to his van, transferred the captives, and abandoned Mary's car near the park. He arrived home after midnight. Holding them at gunpoint, he led the captives inside and forced them to go down to the basement, to the storage room he had prepared in advance. There was only a blanket on the floor, pillows, and a bucket for a toilet. Ming chained the mother and daughter to the wall, locked the door, and left them in complete darkness. Beth screamed and cried, while Mary tried to stay composed for her daughter's sake. The only thing she could do at that moment was pray. Pray that their lives would be spared, and that they would escape this situation alive. But deep down, Mary felt utterly helpless. She didn't know where they were, didn't understand what this man wanted, and didn't even know who he was. The very next day, the search for Mrs. Stauffer and her daughter began. Mary's husband, Irvin, not waiting for his wife and child to return from the hairdresser, contacted the police and reported them missing. This happened just a few hours after Jason Wilkman's disappearance. When Irvin described Mary's car, the police quickly put two and two together and realized that Mrs. Stauffer's car was somehow connected to the boy's abduction. Now a woman and 2 minors were listed as missing. This prompted the police to act more decisively. The FBI immediately got involved, and a large-scale search for all 3 began. Soon, the authorities found Mary's abandoned car near the park, but beyond that, there were no leads in the case. They had no idea where the car's owner and the children had gone. On May 17, 1980, the day after the kidnapping, Ming pulled Mary out of the closet, leaving Beth alone. He had been waiting for this private meeting with Mary for 15 years. His carefully thought-out plan had failed, and now the man wanted to know why Mrs. Stauffer kept pretending she didn't recognize him. Shiue set up a video camera to record their conversation and began asking questions. The former teacher honestly admitted she had no idea who he was. Ming explained to Mary that they were connected by the past, the time when she taught algebra at Alexander Ramsey High School. However, no matter how hard Mary tried to recall those times, nothing came to mind. But she did remember a troublesome student named Bob, which infuriated Ming even more. In a rage, the man shouted, asking if she only remembered troublemakers and forgot diligent, hard-working students like him. Only then did it dawn on Mary that the man before her was one of her former students. In complete shock, Mrs. Stauffer asked what he wanted. Ming was ashamed to admit that for 15 years he hadn't forgotten his teacher for a single moment, that he remembered every smile and wave of her hand, and had imagined her without clothes more than once. So he fabricated an entire fantastical story. Ming claimed that Mrs. Stauffer had once given him a B- in algebra. Because of this, he wasn't accepted into college, was drafted into the army, and sent to Vietnam, where he was taken prisoner. So, essentially, Mary was to blame for all of Ming's life problems because of that B-. Naturally, this was all fiction. Shiue never served in the army, was never in Vietnam, and certainly wasn't a prisoner of war. The man simply wanted to make Mary feel guilty for ruining his life with that grade. The conversation lasted several hours. Stauffer sat in complete bewilderment as Ming promised to release her in 4 days so she could make it to the Philippines. But first, he had to punish her. After the conversation, he dragged Mary to the bedroom and assaulted her multiple times. He filmed the entire process on a video camera to rewatch later for his own satisfaction. After that, Stauffer was locked back in the closet, where she and Beth stayed almost 24 hours a day. Every day, Ming personally prepared their favorite food. He knew the mother and daughter's tastes because he had been watching them for a year. Every day, the man let Mary out only to assault her, then locked her back in the closet without even allowing her to shower. Naturally, Ming didn't release his captives after 4 days as promised. Now, he began separating Mary from her daughter to break her will. After that, he would take 8-year-old Beth out of the closet and lock her in his van for a few hours. To cope with the panic and fear, the girl started pulling out her own hair. This was a sort of coping mechanism for the ordeal. Beth didn't know that her mother was going through even worse, but Mary didn't give up and thought of various ways to escape captivity. One day, Mary was fortunate enough to find an old dry cleaning receipt in the closet with Ming's home address on it. Now she at least knew where they were. She memorized the address and, just in case, made her daughter do the same, then destroyed the receipt. Meanwhile, as Mary and Beth were locked up, their disappearance began to be mentioned in the news. Shiue guessed that Mrs. Stauffer's car had likely been found and panicked. To throw the police off the trail, he forced Mary to write a letter to her husband, stating she left of her own accord and wouldn't return home. After sending the letter, Ming was convinced the police would stop the search, and the investigators did indeed go quiet. However, they immediately realized the letter was either fake or written under duress. So, the FBI ordered the media to stop covering the case. The authorities wanted to give the kidnapper a false sense of security, creating the impression that they had halted the investigation. The detectives hoped the perpetrator would relax and make a mistake. Meanwhile, the search for the missing Jason Wilkman continued. Until remains were found, it was assumed the boy had also been kidnapped. Unfortunately, Mary and Beth's captivity turned into days, then weeks. The mother and daughter were still chained in the dark closet, with no hope of rescue. One day, Mary heard footsteps upstairs. She assumed someone else lived in the house besides Ming. When their kidnapper left for work, she and Beth began banging on the walls, trying to attract the attention of whoever lived upstairs. But Ron, it seemed, simply didn't notice the unusual noises. The thing was, the house was divided into several separate sections. Each brother had his own kitchen, separate bathrooms, and living areas. So, Ron never even considered what might be happening on his older brother's side of the house. There was still no connection between them. The men didn't even talk. Over time, Ming realized that neither his brother Ron nor the police suspected where the mother and daughter were being held. No one noticed he had committed a crime. So, the man relaxed, felt comfortable, and even allowed Mary and Beth to leave the closet occasionally. Mrs. Stauffer cooked meals, and they all sat down to eat together like a real family. Ming liked this arrangement very much. He bought Beth books and board games, ensuring the girl ate well and properly. They watched TV together. From the outside, everything looked peaceful and calm, but the homeowner always kept a gun on him. He warned Mary that if they tried to escape, he would shoot them. When Shiue went to work, he locked the captives back in the closet. Despite the eased restrictions and newfound freedom, there was one thing Mary couldn't reconcile herself with. It was the daily assaults by Ming. This was the one thing she refused to submit to. Mary screamed, lashed out, and resisted, but she couldn't overpower the man. In truth, Ming wanted love and romance, the kind he wrote about in his numerous romantic novels. He repeatedly tried to convince Mary that she should learn to enjoy it, to embrace and kiss him, to be tender with him. But Mary couldn't bring herself to do it. The more she refused and rejected him, the more Ming struggled with intimacy issues. Once, Shiue demanded that Mrs. Stauffer kiss him, but she flatly refused. This so enraged the man that he pulled Beth out of the closet, put a plastic bag over her head, and said he would suffocate her if Mary defied him. A struggle raged within the woman. On one hand, she saw her daughter running out of air, but on the other, if she gave in now, things would only get worse. In the end, the mother couldn't bear Beth's suffering and kissed Ming on the cheek, but he only released the girl after she kissed him on the lips. This incident solidified in Mary's mind that the man who kidnapped them was capable of extreme measures. 3 weeks had passed since the mother and daughter settled into the basement closet. Ming felt so confident that he decided to take his captives on a vacation, hoping Mary's heart would finally melt. A business conference was happening in Chicago. Shiue, as the owner of a small company, planned to attend, taking Mary and Beth with him. He rented a camper van and set off with his captives across state lines. Suspecting the trip might be risky, Ming took every possible precaution. He taped cardboard over all the windows, tied up the mother and daughter, and warned that if they tried to seek help, he would shoot Mary, Elizabeth, and any potential rescuer. On June 9th, shortly before midnight, they embarked on their little journey. In Chicago, Ming first attended the conference, then decided to take Mary and Beth on a tour. They strolled through a mall, stopped at a cafe, and made a bunch of purchases. Stauffer, knowing the FBI was searching for them, paid for one purchase with a traveler's check, hoping it could be traced. But she took the risk for nothing, as the FBI never received any information about the check. One day, when Mary and Beth were left alone in the van, the girl mustered the courage to move a piece of cardboard from a window. Outside, she saw a group of teenagers. Beth got the attention of the high schoolers and said she and her mom had been kidnapped. Unfortunately, the teens didn't take the little girl's words seriously. They thought she was just fooling around and walked away, laughing merrily. A few days later, Ming, Mary, and Beth returned from their little vacation. The man was overjoyed and felt on cloud nine. It seemed to him as if he finally had a real family. His fantasies were truly becoming reality. Ming was so smug that he decided to grant one wish for Mary and Beth, allowing the girl to call home and wish Irvin a happy Father's Day. The only condition was that Beth couldn't mention Ming or say where they were. This call confirmed Irvin Stauffer's certainty that his wife and daughter were alive and was good news for the FBI. The search for Mary and Beth became even more intense. A few more days passed. The mother and daughter were stuck in the distorted reality Ming had created. June 20th was Mary's birthday. Shiue made his captives sit at the table and sing "Happy Birthday" to Mary while she blew out the candles on the cake. All this time, Ming continued writing his romantic stories, only now the plots were slightly different. The novels always featured a woman and her daughter, meaning Mary and Beth. Otherwise, everything repeated. July 7th arrived, the 53rd day of captivity. Ming enjoyed their joint Chicago trip so much that he got the idea to rent a camper van again and go on a year-long trip together. Mary realized she couldn't let this happen. It finally dawned on her that Ming had no intention of letting them go. If they got in the van and left for a whole year, they would never escape to freedom. On July 7th, when Ming, as usual, went to work, locking the captives in the closet, Mary decided it was time to act. The day before, his brother Ron had left on business, so Shiue moved the mother and daughter to a larger closet on the first floor for their comfort. Being overly confident, the man didn't take the same precautions as before. In the old closet, he had reinforced the hinges, removed the inner doorknob, and always pushed a cabinet against the closet door before leaving for work. Even if Mary managed to open the door somehow, she certainly wouldn't have the strength to move the heavy furniture. But this time, he did nothing to prevent the captives from escaping. Mary looked at the door hinges, and the idea came to her to pull out the pin. Everything went smoothly. The camper van story gave her resolve. When the door flew out of the frame, Mary couldn't believe her eyes. Although Mary and Elizabeth were chained together, they managed to reach the kitchen phone and call the police. They remembered the address from the dry cleaning receipt they found in the closet. After making the call, the mother and daughter escaped outside and hid behind a car parked near the house, despite the dispatcher's request to stay inside. The thing was, Beth was terrified that the bad man would return and lock them in the closet again. A few minutes later, the police arrived. With guns drawn, they burst into the house and frantically searched all the rooms. Beth and Mary were nowhere to be found. Only then, noticing movement near the car, did they see the chained captives. The mother and daughter were urgently taken to the hospital. During their captivity, Mary had lost 9 kilograms. Both needed immediate medical attention. As soon as the medics confirmed that the woman and child's health was not in danger, they were taken to the police station to give statements. The investigators' first questions to Mary were about 6-year-old Jason Wilkman, as they had assumed all this time that the boy was also in captivity. Stauffer said they hadn't seen Jason since the day they were kidnapped. In reality, the woman didn't know what had happened to the child. Finding no trace of the boy in Shiue's house, the detectives concluded Jason was no longer alive. That same day, Ming was arrested right in his company's office. He acted calmly, as if it were all a misunderstanding. However, the police made a terrible mistake. When Shiue was brought into the sheriff's office, he came face to face with Mary and Beth in the hallway. Ming started yelling at the woman. He genuinely didn't understand why she had escaped. But this unexpected encounter didn't dampen the joy of the Stauffer family's reunion. Irvin and their younger son were overjoyed that Mary and Beth were alive. However, the teacher's ordeal didn't end there. Ming was furious and swore to take revenge on his former beloved. While in jail, he offered another inmate $50,000 to kill Stauffer and her daughter. He wanted to prevent them from testifying against him in court. The cellmate, without hesitation, passed the information to the FBI, hoping for a reduced sentence. After that, Ming tried to escape from jail to take revenge on Mary himself. Being an electronics expert, he planned to disable the security system using foil from candy bars. It didn't work because a guard spotted him. After the failed attempt, Shiue was moved to a cell under constant surveillance. Ming Sen Shiue stood trial on September 9, 1980. He pleaded not guilty to the kidnapping. Mary Stauffer showed great courage and came to court to testify. As soon as the woman entered the courtroom, Ming jumped from his seat and started shouting, asking why she had abandoned him. He behaved so disruptively that security had to remove him. Mary recalled and described every detail of her ordeal. The defense tried to argue the defendant's insanity, but psychiatrists found no serious mental issues in Shiue. Perhaps Ming did suffer from a mental disorder, but he was fully aware of his actions and knew he was doing wrong. Moreover, the defendant had planned the kidnapping for a long time, which indicated premeditation. In the end, Ming Sen Shiue was found guilty and sentenced to 30 years in prison. This was the penalty for kidnapping Mary and Beth Stauffer. A second trial against Shiue began in 1981. Ming made a deal with the police. He would face a second-degree murder charge if he revealed the location of Jason Wilkman's body. Shiue led the police to where he had hidden the boy's remains. The parents finally learned the truth about what happened to their only son. At the trial for the murder of 6-year-old Jason, Mary testified again. She wanted to do everything possible to keep the criminal behind bars as long as possible. Somehow, Ming smuggled a knife into the courtroom, and when Stauffer took the stand, he leaped over the table and attacked her, slashing her face with the blade. Fortunately, security managed to stop him before he inflicted more serious injuries. Mary was immediately taken to the hospital, where she received 62 stitches. The deep scar on her face became a permanent reminder of one of the most challenging trials in the woman's life. But Stauffer didn't back down from testifying, and when the trial resumed, she did what she had to do. Ming Sen Shiue was found guilty of Jason's murder and sentenced to 40 years in prison, to be served concurrently with his previous 30-year sentence. In the correctional facility, Ming was undoubtedly one of the worst inmates. He was caught multiple times making homemade weapons. He attacked other inmates, threatened guards, and showed no remorse for what he did to Mary, Beth, and Jason. Shiue refused any treatment and was eventually transferred to a maximum security prison. While Ming served his sentence, the Stauffer mother and daughter managed to return to normal life. The entire family, as planned, moved to the Philippines. Mary remained devoted to her faith and continued working for the benefit of the church and her community for many years. Stauffer gave countless interviews, sharing her story in hopes it would help other victims of violence. All these years, Ming remained obsessed with Mary. Now he said that if he ever got out, no matter how old he was, he would track her down and take her life. If Mary were dead by then, he threatened to take the lives of her children and grandchildren. But it's unlikely this criminal will ever be released. Under Minnesota law, a person deemed a sexual threat to society can be held in a correctional facility indefinitely until it's determined they are no longer dangerous. Fortunately, Ming Sen Shiue doesn't meet this criterion and remains behind bars. In 2019, a film called Abducted, the Mary Stauffer story, was released, based on the real life of this woman. In it, the heroine Mary showed, through her example, that one must not lose faith even in the most difficult circumstances. If you have finished watching, you are a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications, and put the like. See you in the next video.